And I've got a very, very brief Coach's Corner segment. In a previous Coach's Corner segment, I talked about 3 different ways to try to estimate your total daily energy expenditure, which is always a great place to start if you're thinking about putting together a diet, whether it's going to be a weight loss diet, a maintenance diet, a weight gain diet. You want to start by getting a calorie target, and figuring out your total daily energy expenditure is going to be very, very informative for that. So I talked about 3 different approaches that you could take. You could assume, you could estimate, or you could observe. And you could go back to that episode. I think it was the most recent episode where I walked through those 3 different approaches. But now I want to kind of extend those 3 different approaches and talk about how we would use those to actually set a calorie target rather than just simply estimating total daily energy expenditure. So if you want to do the assume approach, this is where we're making a very very basic assumption. It's not particularly detailed or nuanced. For some people, it simply won't work well. But you could make an assumption based on calories relative to body weight. So you could think of it as being, 15 calories per pound of body weight in many cases is going to put you around maintenance. And you can think of that as 15 plus or minus 1. So like 14 to 16 for a lot of people. And 15 calories per pound is equivalent to 33 kilocalories per kilogram. Okay. And when I say calories here, I'm talking about kilocalories, just to be clear. So 15 calories per pound or 33 calories per kilogram will put you right around maintenance, plus or minus, that range I mentioned. If you wanted to push a cut pretty hard, you might go down all the way to about 11 calories per pound or 24.2 calories per kilogram. Physique athletes who are kind of lower on the energy expenditure spectrum, sometimes they'll go down as low as 10 or even 9 calories per pound for brief periods of time at the end of their prep. It's brutal. It's very low calorie intakes, but I know some people are going to look at these numbers in bulk and say, no, I need way fewer calories if I'm cutting. So for an aggressive cut, in my opinion, is usually around 11, but you will sometimes see instances where to get really, really lean late in a diet, you do have to go below 11. For a bulk, moderate bulk might be up around 17 calories per pound. An aggressive bulk would be a little bit higher, up around 19 calories per pound. Again, these are all plus or minus 1, give or take. This is a really rough estimate that we're getting here. We posted about this today on Instagram, and people already were saying those estimates don't really work for me. And that is not just understandable, it's to be expected. Rough estimates are going to have areas where they simply don't work well for a given individual. That's why in Macro Factor, we don't use this concept at all. This is just kind of the easiest, most straightforward, basic way to do it. A more nuanced approach, which is particularly useful if you have no data about an individual's energy expenditure or energy intake and body weight changes over time. If you're just starting with a blank slate, we could use the estimate approach where we would use, some type of equation and some type of activity correction factor to estimate total daily energy expenditure. And then we would just set the calorie target based as a percentage of total daily energy expenditure. So, we talked about the Harris-Benedict equation is pretty good for people who don't do resistance training. I think the Cunningham equation is great for people who do lift weights and do resistance training. But you want to use one of the very common estimation equations, and then you want to use the activity correction factors. I think ours are better than the standard because the standard ones kind of don't make sense. I'm not saying ours are perfect either. I mean, it's hard to try to do an activity correction factor.
I mean, one of the things that makes it difficult to make them perfect is the fact that exercise doesn't affect total daily energy.
We should have put out a table, and every cell on the table just says 0. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So anyway, you're going to get your total daily energy expenditure estimate. If you want to do an aggressive cut, you might be eating like 60 to 70% of estimated total daily energy expenditure. Moderate cut will probably be about 80 to 90%. So you'll be in a 10, 20% deficit. Maintenance obviously is just 100%. Moderate bulk would be up around 105 to 110%. And then an aggressive bulk, you'd be eating 115 to 120% of your estimated total daily energy expenditure. Some people might think, I could push harder than that. If I'm bulk, I could go higher. And that's ultimately going to depend on what kind of a hurry you're in, how much adipose tissue you're comfortable gaining during that muscle gaining phase. and also what your potential for muscle gain is. You know, people who have really great muscle building genetics who are early in their lifting career, they probably can get away with pushing some pretty serious caloric surpluses because they've got a whole bunch of capacity to add muscle quickly, and adding muscle quickly is a process that requires a lot of energy. Now, the third approach is observe. And, you know, when we talked about total daily energy expenditure, we talked about observing your energy intake, changes in body weight, using that to make inferences about changes in total daily energy expenditure and the total energy content of one's body, you know, based on changes in body composition. So with the observe approach, it's the same kind of deal. We want to be watching changes in body weight over time and using that to guide whether or not we need to change our calorie target. So, you know, if you are using this observe approach, what you're doing is tracking your calorie target, tracking changes in body weight and composition, and then basically titrating your calorie intake from there, aiming for a particular rate of weight change, whether it's weight loss or weight gain. So if you're on a pretty aggressive cut, you might be losing body weight at over 1% of body weight per week. You know, 1.5. Usually that's about where you're going to find things. If you start getting over too far over 1.5% of body weight per week, it starts to get pretty aggressive. It's not a particularly enjoyable process there. Moderate cut is usually 0.25 to 1% of body weight lost per week. Maintenance, obviously, is just keeping body weight pretty stable. A moderate bulk, you might be looking to gain 0.1 to 0.25% of body weight per week. And with an aggressive bulk, you might be gaining over 0.25% of body weight per week. So are kind of the three different approaches, extending those from estimating total daily energy expenditure, taking it a step further and seeing how those would ultimately lead to you know, recommendations in terms of a calorie target for a variety of different goals. And, you know, whether you choose between a moderate or a more aggressive cut, a moderate or a more aggressive bulk, a lot of contextual factors that go into that. These general guidelines don't necessarily work perfectly for everyone, especially the first couple approaches have some limitations where there are people who just are on the higher or lower end of the spectrum for total daily energy expenditure. There are people for whom some of those estimation equations don't work perfectly well, especially like the Harris Benedict and Cunningham ones, I think are kind of the cream of the crop. But there are some ones that are commonly used that for certain populations, they just don't work particularly well. So these are to try to get within the ballpark, but the observe approach where you're actually making changes based on changes in body weight over time is a really tried and true method to make sure that you're keeping on track. And so obviously with macro factor, when we have, you know, changes in body weight, we've got all your daily caloric intakes, we're able to update those calorie targets on the fly. And that's really the basis of how we do it.